Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's WBCA-NABC Coaches Forum. Today, we will be discussing all things media engagement. Excited to introduce a panel from across different levels of college athletics, across different position types. So in a minute, I'll introduce them. But first, I want to take a moment to thank our NABC and WBCA partners at Marriott Bonvoy for their support of both the WBCA, the NABC, and this ongoing Coaches Series Forum. And with that, I'd like to introduce our panelists today. Tricia Cullip is the head women's basketball coach at the University of Toledo. Tricia, thanks for being on.
Thanks for having me.
Mike DeCourcy is a national college basketball columnist at Sporting News. Mike, thanks for being on.
Oh, no problem.
Jimmy Elgis is the head men's basketball coach at Henderson State University. Coach, thanks for being on today.
No problem, Eric. Thank you.
Yep. And Marlene Navor is the director of men's basketball communications at Auburn University. Marlene, thank you for being on.
Happy to be here and joining the panel.
Yeah. So thanks to all of you for being on and for taking the time to share your unique perspective and wisdom on this topic with NABC and WBCA members and any members of the public that have tuned in today as well. Just one note, if time permits towards the end of our session, we'll try to take some questions from our viewers. So if you would like to utilize the Q&A function here within Zoom, just type in your questions. And like I said, if we have time towards the end to get to it, we'll get to as many questions as we can. But with that, let's jump right in to our topic. Just from a broad perspective, there seems to be this cliche that college basketball coaches in general, and media often have a strained relationship. I want to know if that's just a cliche or if that actually is the case at times. So I guess, Mike, you as the media member representing the call, do you find that true, not true, or somewhere in between?
I think that where that cliche or whatever is off course is, you should have said college football coaches have it, because they do. I mean, like, that's almost universal. I have found, and my position now for the last 20 plus years,
we may have, Mike may have cut out on us a little bit there. He was having some internet issues. We lost you there for a second. Mike, looks like you're back.
I apologize.
That's all right.
My position now at the Sporting News is different than when I was a daily newspaper beat reporter. Having a national platform, people are very welcoming for the most part for the coverage, the scope that I in the sport.
It's like some technical difficulties for Mike again. Mike, if you can hear us, we'll jump back to you here in a minute. But Coach Cullip, you've been a coach at several stops here. What has your experience there been? Has it mostly been positive? Has it been negative? Or like I said, has it been somewhere in between?
I think mostly positive. I think we all understand that we've got a job to do. They've got a job to do. We want to have our coverage. And so, I think where it gets the misconception is that it's a very emotional sport. A lot of highs, a lot of lows, and sometimes you're going into that press room after a big win where it's exhilarating, or a difficult loss, and you've got to gather your thoughts and get it ready and make sure you're presenting yourself in a good light. And I think sometimes things get misconstrued, but I would say for the most part, the interactions that I've seen on our institution and the places that I've been have been very positive with the media.
Coach Elgis, a similar question to you. You've coached at different levels. You've been at the Division I level, you're at the Division II level now. Has your interaction with the media changed depending on what level you're at, or has that dynamic remained fairly consistent as you've made different career stops?
No, I think probably the frequency of the media exposure, from where Marlene's at to where Coach Cullip is, to where I'm at, probably in descending order. We don't necessarily have the daily rigor of a radio, of multiple television stations, newspaper, print, the fans' websites and all those kinds of things. So it's on a smaller scale, but, just to echo to what Coach Cullip said is, it's so emotional and what you have to do, I think, as a coach, from my perspective, is you have to try to keep your emotions in check and try to control what you can control. You cannot control all the questions that come at you, but what you can control is how you respond. You can't control the honesty with which you give them. And then for me, I think the biggest thing that we try to keep in mind, or that the guys that I've worked for, that I've witnessed really well, is to understand that the media has a job. They're up against a deadline right at the end of a game. They have a really important article to write, or a soundbite to get on the television station, on the news. And so they're trying to do a job. And so their emotions are high too, right? They're moving. So I think just being honest with them, making sure that you are transparent with what you're trying to say, and understand that they have a job to do as well. And I think if you keep those in mind, it's relatively been a really positive experience, the places that I've been.
Marlene, in your position in the athletic communication media relations field, you're the liaison that tries to connect the coach and the media member. So in your experience, I'm sure you've had coaches who have had strong relationships with media. You may have had some coaches who haven't been so, but how does a strong relationship between a coach and members of the media develop, and how can it be maintained?
I think, as both coaches alluded to, it's definitely, they have a job, the media has a job to do, and it's not personal. And then the best journalists aren't going to attack someone's character or write a report they're going to write a report based on strong facts and sources. So I don't know, over the years, it always seems like it's our local sports columnists, if any journalists, that, coaches may have disagreements with, just because those, columnists are writing about their opinion. It's not a fact-based article. And sometimes those are hard to take as a coach, that it's not a personal attack on them, but based on, the coaching and the team and their performance. But obviously, as an SID, we're there to be that go-between person with the coach and the media. And I think that's one thing. If you have a really good SID who knows your media well, that relationship that your SID has will help a coach, especially in my career. I've work with women's basketball coaches and men's basketball coaches, and some have been first-year head coaches, and most of them have been veterans. So I've been lucky that I've had veteran coaches in their career that, are already media savvy. But my first-year coaches, I always would try to get them in front of the local folks. And as far as some of the national that I may have, I've been at different levels too. I've been at the mid-major, I've been at the P5. So it's different, but I think the same thing is just getting out in front, getting to know the journalists early on too. Like, really, the press conference for a first-year head coach, it would usually be in their introductory press conference, getting to meet one-on-one with each of the media members there, and then holding an event. Sometimes I would hold a golf tournament or something fun, like a luncheon, for our coach to get to know the guys that isn't basketball related, to talk about who they are as a person, and showing the human side of coach. So I think that's where it starts there. And, I've had coaches that have had relationships before with media members that they just go straight to coach, and I'm fine with that as well. But I also do want to make sure that we don't favor media members over another, that we're a even balance of things that we're giving to each media member that covers us. But every place and every school that I've been at has been different, but for the most part, it's been positive, and positive with the media that covers the school.
Thanks, Marlene. To either of the coaches, Jimmy and Tricia, looking back on your careers, are there any specific relationships with members of the media that you've had that went beyond just the required obligations of a press conference or a radio show or something like that? And if you have had a strong one-on-one relationship with a member of the media, how did you develop that relationship? How was it built, and how was it fostered over time?
I'll start. I think when I was a student athlete at Purdue, I was a communication major. And so for 2 summers in the off season, I interned with the TV station. And so I was the one running around with them and learning all the background stuff to understand and appreciate now as a coach what their deadlines are, what they've got to do, what they're looking for, how to be prepared for something. And so it's been really good full circle for me to be a better coach, that I had a chance to learn the background. So I think in college, even as I was being interviewed as a student athlete, I was being interviewed by people I worked with. And so I already had a really good relationship with them and an understanding. But I also think, having been at Toledo for 14 years, I know all the media. And when we change over someone, we make sure, as Marlene stated, that we have a meeting with them and that we sit down and get to know them, because I think that first initial get to know you is very, very important to learn the different styles that people receive information and give it. But I think the most important thing is to be a truth teller and to make sure that you're being very transparent as much as you can be. Obviously, sometimes HIPAA rules and different things keep us from being as transparent as maybe we want to be. But, you know, I think knowing that we're trying to do the best job we can for them to write the stories and produce stories and content, but we're also aiding them with information too. When we know something's coming up that's a big deal. I've got a student athlete who's going to be throwing out the first pitch at a minor league baseball game. So I made sure that our media knows so they can go capture that moment if they want. So I think it's twofold: being honest and being very poignant in getting back to them, not letting them miss deadlines, but also producing content and letting them know about it and have a first heads up so they're not reading about it somewhere else.
Great, thanks, Tricia. Yeah, we'll get to some of that proactive storytelling a little bit later in our program. But Jimmy, similar question to you: how have you maintained or built relationships with members of the media over your career? So we may have lost Jimmy there for a second. Jimmy, we'll come back to you if you can hear us. Mike, switching the spotlight to you in your role, how is your job, your ability to cover a program or to cover the sport on a national level, how is that impacted by the level of relationship or level of openness that you experience with the coaches at different programs?
You know, I think probably my experience as a daily beat writer is more germane to coaches generally, because the doors, I'm sure this is true for Andy Katz or Jeff Goodman or Seth Davis or whomever among the national media, that the doors open fairly easily for me now at the Sporting News. But when I was a daily writer, working in Pittsburgh, Memphis, Cincinnati, obviously that's the situation that most of the people on the call would encounter. And for me, my most successful relationships started with open practices, not open to everybody necessarily, but open to someone like me who covered the team every day. And that did that. Now, that wasn't universal across every beat that I covered, but I have a story that I like to tell about when I was covering Memphis. I believe it was my first year on the beat, and Larry Finch's practice for me and for anybody else in the media who wanted to, and that it wasn't taken up by that many people. But we only had one paper in the town, the Commercial Appeal, and I was there every day, unless there was some really unusual circumstance. I was there every day for practice. And after probably around February, early February, late January, there was a particular player. He'd been a local high school star, was not a great success. And his family requested a meeting with me and my editor to talk about why the young man, wasn't playing. And so we agreed to that. And they came in and they said, you know, why isn't he playing? He should be playing. And I said, I'm at practice every day. And the young man was a really good young man, but he didn't follow instructions. If Larry said go left, he went right. And I mean, it was almost uncanny how often it happened. And so when they came, I said, look, I love the kid, but if Larry says left, they go right. And so they were really upset about the fact he wasn't playing. And as I told what I'd seen and observed, you know, one member of the family was listening and buying it, and the other family member was still fighting me a little bit on it. And they said, we're going to picket outside the pyramid the fact that he's not playing. Now, it's great visual. It could have been a great story. It could have been a page one story for me, except I knew the truth, and I'm going to tell the truth. And the young man wasn't playing because he shouldn't have been playing. So I went out before the game and said, yep, they're there. And then I put a little note in my notebook column, but it wasn't a page one story. And I'm telling you that if there weren't for open practices, I would definitely that would have been a banner headline. It might even have been on A1 for us. given the nature of how unusual it is to see something like that. But because I knew the story wasn't based in fact, because I was there, it became a nothing story. And so those kinds of things, look, I believe that more and more college basketball coaches should consider following the guidelines that the NFL has with the Pro Football Writers Association. You can observe, you can't write about what you see. You can maybe later ask about what you see, and if they don't want to talk about it, you can't write. But there's a value to that, to being able to see, because then you know the truth. And you know, I'm sure there are writers who maybe would have made that story a big story anyway. But because I was there every day, I had the knowledge of being there. And it doesn't make me, you know, other than being someone who showed up for work every day, doesn't make me a genius or whatever. But Larry opened the doors to do that, and that saved him significant embarrassment.
It's a great story, Mike. Thanks for sharing. But before I move on to the next question, I'm going to put Tricia and Jimmy on the spot. How would you feel about having a partially open practice like Mike describes there? Or is that something that in the current day and age gives coaches too much heartburn?
Can you guys hear me okay?
Go ahead, Jim.
I don't know what happened there. Yeah, I think I would totally be open to that. I think what I was going to follow up with the question about just what's important between the media and a coach is honesty. And I think you got to spend time with each other. You got to know sort of what the program's heartbeat, what I believe in, what I'm trying to do with our players, what I'm trying to do with the program, what we're trying to foster within our kids. And the way that you see that is spend time with me or spend time watching our guys. And so I definitely agree with Mike. I think there's a real, I love what the NFL does. You can't ask about it, you know, off the record, but coming in and like Mike's saying, when you got a pro like Mike is, who's going to be truthful and be fair with what he sees and educate himself with what he's in there observing, there's the possibility from a coach's perspective, you don't trust that guy or this guy. And the only way that you build trust is to spend time with one another. And so I think an open practice, you know, continuously, I think there's certain days where maybe you have one scheduled and based upon where your team is maybe not in a good place or you're not in a good place. And surely Mike, guys understand that, you know, today's not a great day to be in there. So spending time with each other, being transparent, like Coach Culp said, and having access, I think is really, really important.
And I would agree with Jimmy. You know, one thing we've always had is an open practice. I don't really can choose when people think they're allowed to come all the time. I think that does help in the relationship building because they know they can come at the beginning or the end, whatever's convenient for them to grab the story. And the other thing I would just say is, you know, sometimes just being flexible. There have been times that some of our TV reporters have said, hey, do you care if we do a live shot at the game? Maybe that changes my routine prior to the game just a little bit, but maybe that also grabs a couple fans for that game and gets them in the stand. So they're helping you with marketing too, and understanding that, you know, we've got to bend a little bit to help each other.
Marlene, it's inevitable that coaches, athletic directors, even SIDs like you inevitably take issue with something that a media member has written or said on the air. What's the professional way to handle that? And how do you handle that in a way that doesn't create a strain between the coach and that member of the media or the athletic director or you, the SID?
Right. Obviously, you would want your SID to be that person to speak with the media. But I have had head coaches that have gone straight on, but based on their relationship that they had with the writer. But I think definitely coaches probably should let their media relations director handle it. And, you know, I think it just depends on what was written. It's hard because journalism has changed so much. I went to school to be a sports writer, and then I got into this because they recruited me out of the student newspaper at Washington State to work in the SID office. So I never knew I'd get into this part of the business, but you know, I mean, I've had a lot of it this past year of things that were written about our team, and either coach went to the broadcaster or newspaper writer or myself. And I think it just depends. Like I said, if it's factually wrong, then of course, you know, hey, we need it changed in the newspaper or the article online. It just depends on it. But I would hope, that both parties can learn from it moving forward. I have it a lot with student journalists, a lot more, but I do have it with the full-time journalists. So I think it's just a case-by-case basis of correcting what the issue is with the person involved. And I like to do it. And well, now that we're out of the Zoom era, we're back to being in person. I'd love to do it more in person than just over the phone or an email. Definitely over the phone or in person than an email, because I think emails, you don't get either the true, what they're trying to say to you about it. So I don't know. It happens. It does happen a lot on this level too. But I think, you got to move forward if you can come to a common ground, or at least change what was factually wrong if your coach had an issue with something being said, especially misquoting someone. That's probably one of the bigger issues probably too, making sure that, I've had that this year with my coach, that his words were spinned around, that was not actually what he said. And we corrected it by sending footage from the press conference or somebody that may be recording that was not what he said.
Thanks, Marlene. It sounds a common thread so far has been transparency and trust among coaches and the members of the media, right? That allows conversations to happen like what you're describing, that doesn't turn into a fight, right? So that's a big takeaway from us as we started here. Shifting gears a little bit to preparing either yourselves or your student athletes for media appearances. I'll start with the coaches. How do you yourselves prepare for media appearances? Are you rigid in preparing talking points and working with your SID to develop a strategy? Are you more of a wing it, just speak your mind without too much prep work? Yeah. How do you go about preparing for your interactions with the media?
For us, if it's a preseason one, I may write out a couple bulletin points of things that I hope I can get across about our team, because maybe it's some themes that I hope are present in the story. Obviously, you have no control of that, but if there's certain things you want to talk about, I keep those with me. But I think as the years have gone on, I've become better at thinking on my feet and making sure that I'm ready. But that comes through experience. When I first started out, I wrote a lot more notes. But as far as prep, I think there's nothing better than going through practices if you're nervous. That's something that, and I know this is something we may talk about later, but that's something that we do with our team every year. And I think it's good for even your staff to go through so that they're used to thinking on their feet. For my staff, we have opportunities for them they do the pregame radio show. And I do that on purpose so that they get used to answering questions and thinking on their feet. If we have booster events, there are times that if I'm off recruiting, I make sure they go so that they get those experiences, as do our players. And so I think anytime you can get your whole staff involved, it's a really good thing. It's preparation for their future, and for your players. You think about these interviews are great for the future, because when they graduate, they've got to go to an interview, the biggest interview of their life, to go get a job. And so as many times as you can prepare them to do a wonderful job and think on their feet and be prepared for the unexpected, they're going to do a great job once they graduate. And that's what our whole goal in this is.
Yeah, I like what Coach said, is giving opportunities to grow in your communication skills. I think that's so important for your players as well as the staff. I've had a lot of good young assistant coaches that have worked for me. Those are the kind of guys we get as young, and 4 of them gone on to really big levels and are doing really good things. And I think it's just the experience that they get at our level. For example, not necessarily in regards to the media, but we're doing a golf fundraiser, a miniature golf fundraiser right now. And so my assistant coach is on the phone introducing himself, learning how to get in front of people, learning how to present our program, learning how to present what we stand for. In this case, with maybe boosters or people that can sponsor part of the golf tournament. So I think that anytime you can get your, pregame radio, things like Coach Cullip said, get in front of your team. One of the things that Coach Wooldridge did for me at Kansas State that I take with me to this day is whoever's game prep it is, that assistant coach gives the pregame talk. Now, Coach Simmons, Coach Woldridge, those guys are chiming in and backing you up with whatever you're saying for sure. But that gets our assistant coaches experience about speaking in front of people and understanding the awkward pauses, the M's, the I's, the ands, the, those little things that they can get better at. Like I just did, giving them an opportunity to do that in front of people is really, really important. The same thing with the players, getting those guys on, having a little bit of training so they understand exactly what they need to try to accomplish, and being truthful and giving credit where it's due, whether it be to their players or themselves, I think is really, really important. And they get those on radio, post game. And like Coach Culp said, you just get better as you get older. You got to have that experience, but you got to start somewhere. And I think like Coach gives those opportunities to our players and coaches, we try to do the same.
Eric, if I could jump in here, it happens that I am married to a Hall of Fame level public relations person. She's been a PR person for Fortune 500 companies and is now currently executive marketing director at the Indiana Farm Bureau. And so, although it may seem a little treasonous for me to say this, I've learned by watching her, and I can tell you that media training for athletes and coaches is of great value. And actually, it's of great value to the reporter in the end. Now, it may prevent the a young person or assistant coach from making a slip that someone like me could turn into a really cool news story or whatever. But it also is an opportunity for those people to learn how to be interesting in communicating with a reporter. So there is great value to that. So whatever opportunities that a school has to use their media relations staff to train the people, like I said, coaches, administrators, players, et cetera, I think that's extremely valuable.
And one thing I may add is that's a great opportunity to build a relationship, is ask your local media to do the training, because it's also a pat on their back. But we've done that several times, and that's another icebreaker.
Great. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Tricia. Marlene, staying on that topic, how do you, as a media relations professional, what at Auburn do you do right now, and what have you done in your past jobs to prepare your coaches and student athletes, administrators to be skilled at interacting with the media?
Right. Well, man, in my career, I've worked with some very colorful head coaches. So they've had a mind of their own. I work with Gary Blair on the women's side, and Bruce Pearl now, and Bobby Cremens when I was at Charleston. So I never had issues. I had great coaches that loved the media and said whatever they wanted. So it made my job very easy. But, with Coach here, usually prepare a 1-page prep sheet before every week when we have our local media with stats and things about the other team, our team, game promotions, things that may be happening at the university on that sheet for him to speak on. And we are going to be doing some media training in the next 2 weeks before we go to SEC Basketball Media Day. And we did enlist our Voice of the Tigers, our radio announcer, to come speak with tips on how to interview for radio. And then we have one of our staff writers within auburntigers.com coming to speak on how to interview for TV and print. And then I will be talking about do's and don'ts with our student athletes. Coach Pearl actually will be doing a video and talking about what he expects from them on social media. We'll also have our social media manager come in and talk about best practices, and our director of creative to come in to talk about branding and NIL. So I think that's very important for SIDs, especially at our level. We're always on TV. We'll be probably top 25, and I'll be talking to Mike probably again this year. But yeah, definitely what I find actually with student athletes nowadays, and probably the student athletes we're getting, so a lot of my freshmen, they've interviewed this year already. We went on a preseason tour, and I was very, very impressed by some of the freshmen. And it's because, they've had that interviews in high school because they were a top prospect. So, I've already keyed in on some of the guys that I think are doing well. And I know the newcomers that I'm going to probably have in media training do some of the examples in our mock interviews in front to get them more comfortable. I also do have international student athletes to get them more comfortable, and some language barriers there. But I definitely think it's important. Other schools, we've been able to hire in a professional to come in the past, and I think that has been valuable. But like Coach had said, having some of your local media members come in, that's just another way to have them get to know your kids and your program and your philosophy.
Jimmy, I'm curious, at the Division II level, where you may not have as many resources to hire outside consultants, or your media relations staff probably isn't quite as large as what Auburn's is. Is that something that you do for your athletes, or that your athletic department does for the coaches, provide any kind of media training or prep opportunities like that?
Absolutely. Yeah, we have a media day here, and we have a sports information director now. Our sports information is balancing a lot of different sports at once, maybe doing, some game operations in addition to his sports information duties. So I think that one of the things at the smaller level that we've got to do is me and him got to be on a great communication. We've got to make sure that we are organized with our time, that we set aside some time for them to talk to our guys. Absolutely. And what's funny about us is, because we don't have the daily attention from all the different media, is he, along with I, are responsible for promoting ourselves and getting out content with videos that promote our story, or interviews with our guys that we promote from within ourselves, that he's in charge of, that our sports information director is in charge of. So I think there's training with our guys, and because we are creating a lot of our own content, we can coach them on how to respond to different things, because it's all internal within Henderson State. And so, that's really, really important to us, because we're a small operation, but we have a lot of hands-on with our guys.
Mike, I'm curious, from your perspective, is it plainly obvious when you're interviewing a coach or an athlete and they've had media training, that they've had practice, versus somebody who has not been prepared or not put in time to try to improve those skills?
I think you can tell when somebody hasn't been. There are certainly people who can do that job, do that process without needing the training. But I think when someone hasn't been, you can tell that they haven't been through that training process, through the practice of it. They're uncomfortable. I think that that doesn't always reflect well on the university either, because in my mind, or someone like me, their mind, they might think, they should have really gotten this person and told them how to do this. So I think that, again, there's value in that, because it reflects well on the school if it doesn't become a question, not the question you would ask, but a question in the reporter's mind. Boy, they didn't really sit this person down and tell them how to do this. So I think that, again, it's helpful to the university or the program to make sure that's a base that's covered.
For any of you, Marlene mentioned NIL earlier. In this new era of athletes needing to pay more attention to their brand and strategically build a brand that opens up marketing opportunities for them, is it that much more important now that they are serious about improving their media skills, improving their, I think this is a buzzword, but their personal brand? It has that, because I guess, Marlene, starting with you, have you noticed an increased demand from your athletes to improve in those areas?
Right. And it's and that's why I'm having this media training in the next 2 weeks. I kind of came in late in the season and joined the staff, but I actually had a student athlete last year have a media NIL with a local radio station. So there were some issues with that, like locker room material being said on the broadcast that affected some of the coverage, or, the fans saying things on Twitter. But I definitely, think it's important. That's what we're going to present to the student athletes. The more you do interviews and get yourself out there, people are going to see you in the community or nationally and want to do deals with you. So, because, we do have a lot of shy kids on our team as well, but I've been trying to push them along as well, because to show them, the more you're out there locally, nationally, people are going to see you more to help build your brand. And that's why I'm going to have our director of social media and director of creative come in and talk about that branding, how both work together, that it can only help you to do more and more interviews and getting more experience in being out there.
From a student athlete perspective, we talked, what's your purpose? Are you trying to entertain yourself with the different likes that you have or the different retweets that you have? Are you what are you looking at and what are you liking? Or like you guys have said, are you promoting yourself? Are you promoting the brand or the image that maybe will present an opportunity to yourself or that you want for the future? And so it's so important for young kids. And we talked about it, not only dealing with media, but your social media footprint. What are you doing? What are you liking? And that's really, really, really important these days.
Tricia, at Toledo, I'm sure you all have some kind of NIL platform that offers a variety of resources to help athletes navigate this new world. How does media training, personal branding, social media responsibility, those type of topics, how does that play into what Toledo's doing to equip athletes to succeed in NIL?
Well, it is big. We have it built into our athletic website. Go to University of Toledo, utrockets.com, and you can click on the NIL Resource Center and go to their social media to contact a kid. And so if you're going there, but what you see is not what you want, you're not going to contact that kid for your company. And so it's not only important for that, but I think it goes back to what Jimmy said too. I think it goes beyond NIL. It's what about the person that's going to hire you when you're done? The NIL is one thing, but your bigger job out there, will that employer want to hire you based on what you're showing everybody every day? And that's what we really try to preach to all of our student athletes here, is not just the NIL, but it goes way beyond that. And we want to make sure we're preparing you for the future. So if they look at their own social media and there are question marks there, it's time to maybe shut it down and start over.
Let's talk a little PR 101 here, Mike. It's a shame we don't have your wife on to talk about this, but if you're a coach and you have a you have a story about your program or one of your players that you want to be told, that you want attention on, what's the best way to pitch that? I guess, Marlene, we'll start with you, but anxious to hear what all of you have to say on how you get your story in the hands of the media.
Right. I think depending, if you're a small school, bigger school, especially on a national level, you want to make sure you have the most compelling story. If you have a couple, make sure it's the best one of, you get one shot kind of on the national level of pitching your story. Obviously, human interest stories are always the best, the feel-good stuff, the off the court, the hobbies, academic success. I think that's what people relate to more than just, hey, they're good basketball players. So I think those are the kind of things that attract more people to read and for more people like our national media outlet to pick up. But I also want to emphasize, I truly believe in local journalism. And I said this at our end of the year banquet, Coach, we invited the media to come join our team banquet, and I thanked them because I wanted our student athletes to know that it starts with our local guys. And it's no offense, Mike, but they're writing the most stories about your team. And then honestly, when we're on national TV and we're sending as IDs, we're sending them the stories written by our local guys about our kids. So, those are local journalism is just as important as the national stories, because that's where it's usually picked up from the local level to the national. So, it depends, what can gain traction, but I think, definitely human interest and making sure, for me, when I was at a smaller school, I had national contacts, but I made sure, I knew I could only get probably one story when I was at Charleston compared to Auburn. I probably could get more now, but just making sure it's the right one if you have to choose.
Mike, from your perspective, what's most successful in getting media to pay attention to a story a program wants to tell? Is it the formal pitch email from an SID, or is it a more informal phone call or text from a coach or an administrator that says, hey, I think you should check this out?
Eric, I one of the things that surprised me about my time in this job is how rarely I get pitched. And I got a call from Chris Holtman about 8 years ago, right when I was moving to Indy, right before I moved to Indy. And he was an assistant coach at Butler then, and asked me to join with a small group seminar that he was organizing, sort of one of those skull sessions that coaches do, but he wanted to have me speak about media. And one of the things I told them was, as a coach, you got to scout your media like you scout the opponent. You have to know, who's the person who's going to dig up the dirt no matter what, even if you've got the cleanest program in the world. Who's the person who's interested in this particular type of story and tells it well? And I think that's something that that coaches and media relations people need to do as well. They have to know, what is Mike DeCourcy interested in? What kind of story does he like? Or what does Seth Davis like to do, et cetera? Or what do their locals, how do their locals do it? You have I've had circumstances where I was covering against people who weren't that interested in the sport, and the people who were in the staff and the players kind of knew, like, well, there's Mike who really is interested in this game, and there's the other guy who isn't really. And so I think that made an impression and changed the way each of us were approached. So I think that, I think for me, I'd tell you right now that people who approach me are not batting 1,000, but they're pretty close, because it doesn't happen that often. And if they come with a good idea, I can usually find a way to work it in my schedules. So I think that whether you do it by email or text or whatever, I think I think it's smart to be direct. It's smart to understand who you're approaching. I got an email from a new administrator in a Division I program, so it's on 363 now, so you won't know. But it said, "Dear national media," basically, and I'm like, there's like 12 of us. You couldn't have sat down and written, "Dear Mike," "Dear Seth." Really? It's not that hard. So I think that that's part of the process as well. Instead of, the information that was provided was interesting, but it felt disaffecting because, as I said, if you're writing to 300 people, I get it. You don't want to, but there are a few of us, Nicole Arbach, a few others, that there's just it's such a small group of people that cover college basketball regularly on a national basis that I think you can have a direct approach with people like me. And again, if it's, as Marlene was talking about, it's not a large group of people that are covering Auburn basketball on a regular basis. So you can be direct with those people. And so it kind of works both ways, understand who your audience is and connect with them on a personal level.
All right. And Eric, I'll just jump into, I love, this is probably old school too, SID, but I still contact the hometown newspapers of our kids as well. When there's something written about them, it's not just local, national, it's just their hometown. It may not be close to Auburn, but it's something that their community is going to love about maybe our walk on our team, So I think that's one thing too, to still think about. There's still hometown coverage as well.
It's a great point, Marlene. Trisha, Jimmy, from your perspective, have you ever pitched a story or had a story about your program that you've wanted to get out that you've successfully been able to generate some coverage on?
We had a player who's one of the first Orthodox Jewish female basketball players to play Division I basketball, who played at the University of Toledo. Just so happened we won the NIT in her junior year. And then we had a foreign trip to Israel. So we actually handed out an opportunity to the media to go on the trip with us, because it was such a great moment. Here we are taking her back to her country. Her family's getting a chance to see her in person for the first time. And yet there were so many great stories circulating that we offered to pay for them to go because we wanted an opportunity to have those stories covered. And then obviously stories going back to our fan base while we were there. Those are easy. Things that our team was interacting with every day on the trip. So that's something we've continued to do every time we take a foreign trip. And those are easy stories. But I think the other thing that we do, Eric, that may be a little bit different, I know our men's coach does this too, but I don't go in the locker room after games. I meet my team at half court, I say a few words, and I go straight to media. And I do that in respect of their time. I also do that in respect to my emotions, because I don't want to go in the locker room and say the wrong thing. Sometimes I'm upset because we lost about a certain thing, and it's better for me to sleep on it before I talk to my team about it. It's better for me to not to praise a kid, and then I find out after watching film, maybe the praise was there, but not as much as I gave it. So I watch film, but what our media appreciates is that they get to go home quicker. They're not waiting on us. And so they're more welcome to stick around. Our families love us because they get to see their daughter quicker. And when they've driven 3 or 4 hours to be there. But I will say in the beginning, it seemed kind of weird not to do that. My whole life, I was conditioned to go to the locker room. And what I have found is that I actually sleep better after I watch film that night, and having the opportunity to really soak in what I needed to do the next day allowed everything to go better. So our media and our coverage, I think, is better because of that. Our players get in there for the interviews quicker, and everyone's happy.
It's a great story, Coach. Thanks for sharing. Coach Elgis, you mentioned earlier being at a Division II school that's not in a huge media market. How does your athletic department tell its own story?
We've got a football player right now. Our football team's always been pretty good, been really good. Our current head coach, Scott Maxfield, has become the all-time winningest coach at our school and 3rd or 4th all-time in the state of Arkansas. And we have a hearing impaired young man on the line, and he is having a great year. And so a lot of the content from our sports information folk and from just our social media has been highlighting the play of our team as well as this individual. And so I think it's really important that we create our own content. And I think that we do it by video, a lot of visuals, a lot of pictures that we can get out on Instagram and Twitter. And it's really, really, really important because then guys are picking up on the success of a football team, or guys are picking up on what we've done as a basketball program. And so that is really, really important. And I think what we do really well here is our sports information guys come and they get a lot of footage, and then we create our own content and get that out on social media. One of the things that we've also done here that's been a huge thing for our program's promotion is we do a fans newsletter. We do a newsletter for our former players. And I put it together for every 6 weeks, 8 weeks, highlights the former guys that we've had here. It highlights, the successes that we're having on the court. It highlights our academic successes. It highlights all the things with a lot of visuals, a lot of graphics that we can get out internally. And so I think it's really important for us to be proactive to promote our guys, to promote our program, to promote our university. And so the social media thing is really, really important with video. Like I said, that I think we've had a ton of success with our fan newsletter. They love it. Where are they now? Where, guys that have played for us a handful of years ago that are playing professionally, or young men that are coaching, and then just highlighting our current group of guys. So we've had a lot of success and a lot of really positive feedback throughout our community with those little fans newsletter and former players newsletters that we do.
Tricia and Marlene, looking at the content strategies and initiatives at your school, obviously you're all pushing out game highlights and results and that kind of things. How have you also been able to tell, Tricia, like you mentioned the story of your young woman who had that unique experience in Israel. How have you been able to tell the stories, get the word out of some of the off the court, non-game related stories that are in every program across the country?
Well, I think some of that is sitting down with your staff and brainstorming, and with your SID. Even this past week I've done that, but I think a lot of that too comes down to having a great relationship with those people, so that we can all generate the ideas and then also send them at the appropriate time to the media. And I think it does come back to, do you have that relationship with the media person, that you've got their phone number, that you've got their email, that you can get it out quickly so it's timely, because that's important too. But I think it all does come down to that. What kind of relationship do you have? And have you had some thoughtful thinking into what is going to be the most appealing thing to put out about your team and at what time?
Right. I'm going to go back to Jimmy's question too. I think, having been at a mid-major small school prior to Auburn, we had a 2-person SID office, or 2 to 3 person, but we really relied heavily on our campus communications office at our school that had a bigger staff, that had a video department, helped us with graphics. So I think if you're at a smaller school, really rely on your university communications staff and video department to help you get the word out. Because obviously the athletics is the front porch of a university, and they want to have stories out there about the university to be able to help. And that was what the win-win situation was in my previous stop, was to really get the word out about our teams and programs, was their help. And I agree with Jimmy too. I think video goes a long way now on social. Obviously, it helps recruiting, and that's probably the biggest thing we do now. It's not more about media anymore. It's recruiting kids to our universities. And that's what, our job as SADs have changed, that we're helping recruiting, we're helping get fans to the games, we're helping donors donate money, aside from just the media covering our team. So I definitely think the platforms and the social strategies, there's multiple folks that are audiences that we're trying to reach through our social platforms.
One thing I would just add to that, Marlene, would be our last hiring for a GA is, do you hire a basketball person or do you hire that? And we decided to hire someone that was good at video and graphics because we needed that assistant recruiting coordinator who could help us with the stories our staff wanted to put out. And at a mid-major level, you've got to do a little story generating yourself. And so, it's being creative and having that person who can produce it, because at our level, having those resources in our athletic department isn't always prevalent. But we can create it very cheaply, not cheap in production, but cheaply in that we don't have to pay thousands of dollars for it. You can hire that on your staff as you think about your future staff and how you assemble them.
Right, I agree, Coach. And I think that's the way it's going. I was hired at Auburn to do that on the women's basketball staff because of my experience and my past relationship with Coach, to be that creative person on staff. You're going to see more and more, I think, that SIDs or creatives are going to be on staff, because it's really important, because it's not, the media part is a lot, depending on what school you're at, but the graphics and the creative and the recruiting is a lot more too. So I definitely think it's smart for coaching staffs, if they can hire somebody internally, it benefits.
Thanks, Marlene. I'll note, as we come up towards the end of our hour, if you have any questions for the panelists, feel free to type it into the Q&A. I know we've already got one question in there that we'll get to here in a minute, but yeah, any questions that anybody has, please type them in now and we'll try to get to them. Mike, just putting a bow on this topic of content creation from the program side, as schools, conferences have become essentially their own media companies over the past decade or so. Has that made it easier for you to cover the team because you feel like the curtain has been torn down a little bit? Has it made it harder because schools would rather just do their own thing rather than work with the media? How have you seen that just impact the way you consume and cover college basketball?
Well, when you mentioned conferences, I remember I do work for one of those, so Big Ten Network. So that's sort of, I'm both sides of that. I mean, obviously, being a part of BTN, you see that the schools are very open to cooperation with the work we do there. They're, and not that they're any less open necessarily to, if I call from representing sporting news, but they're very much engaged and involved, almost without exception. And so, but from the standpoint of where I am, I haven't seen any obstacles. I think there's still, even though there's a players' tribune, I think athletes still realize that engaging with the prominent media voices, whether it's ESPN or Fox Sports, or The Athletic or us or Sports Illustrated, I think they understand there's still a way. There are ways that, you can reach directly, but there's a validation to an extent if someone in one of those organizations I mentioned tells your story. I think that if especially the more prominent journalists, if they're telling your story and putting their brand behind it to an extent, I think that schools and athletes understand that there's something valuable to that.
Thanks, Mike. We'll close with this question we received in the Q&A. We got to this a little bit earlier with some of the media training, but the question says, assistant coaches are active with media now, especially in the recruiting space. What type of guidance do you offer your assistant coaches, and how do you help prepare them, even though they may not always be in front of the microphone, to deal with the media? And we'll open that up to any of you.
Go ahead, Jimmy.
No, I was going to say a lot of media, there's a want and a need or an inquiry of recruiting, right? And where better to go from the horse's mouth or try to figure some things out from the coaching staff. So I think it's really, really important from the top down, from the head coach down, that there's a clear and precise path to what we want to do in regards to recruiting, or how we're going to communicate with the media from a staff. Does it all go through the head coach? Or do we trust assistant X or Y to have a great relationship with this person and be able to communicate with the recruiting in that regard? So I think it's really important to be on the same page with it. So that way there's no surprises, right? There's a clean and good communication and transparency between, a coaching staff, the assistant coaches, and the members of the media. I think that's really, really important.
I think being on the same page is important. And I also think getting opportunities, the better you're going to get. If your head coach is not giving those opportunities, ask if you can have them. Study people who are good at it, not just in good times, but bad. How do they handle a terrible loss? And how do they present themselves? And what do they say? And then always ask yourself, am I going to feel good about this statement tomorrow before you say it? And pausing for just a little bit before you answer is always a good thing to make sure you get it right, because once it's out there in social media, it's out there.
From my standpoint, I mean, that's been what I've done for 30 years, 35 years, is, connecting with assistant coaches. And, when I was covering specific beats, that's a different circumstance. But now, when I joined Sporting News in '95 as a columnist, I mean, getting to know assistant coaches was really almost my lifeblood. And I think it was to an extent for them as well, not just me, but others who do what I do. There's a very long list of people who have become head coaches who I got to know, and even without necessarily quoting them, I think that it helped elevate their profile. And every now and then you might get asked. It doesn't happen all the time by a athletic director or someone, hey, who do you think is good? Or, what do you think about this person? And if you've had a relationship with that person that's been positive, then you're going to say, I think that would be great. And, like I said, it's a very long list. Some of them have, won conference championships. Some of them have been to the Final Four. So I think that for the assistant coach, I think it's important to seek out who those people are. Again, it's not exclusively national, but know who the national people are. Know the recruiting analysts. I think understanding how to communicate with them and the importance of communicating with them is a very important part of your career path.
Thanks, Mike. That's a great comment for us to end on. Mike, Marlene, Coach Culp, Coach Elgis, thank you so much for being on with us today. You shared a lot of great wisdom that is applicable to coaches, to administrators, to media members. So we really appreciate you all taking the time today. If any of you tuned in late to our session today, we will have it archived in full in the coming days on our websites, nabc.com and WBCA.org. And I would also like to again thank our partners at Marriott Bonvoy for their support of this session in both our organizations. So again, to our panelists, thank you. To our coaches who tuned in, thank you. And we'll be back in the coming months with another one of our forum series. But thank you all. Have a great day.